The night shift had always been quiet, almost painfully so, but that Christmas Eve, the emptiness felt different. Thicker, heavier, like the air itself was pressing in on me. The fluorescent lights above flickered on and off, buzzing in a way that set my nerves on edge. Every time one of them flickered, the long shadows across the empty aisles seemed to twist and stretch, as if reaching for something or someone. I had been patrolling the small store for years, and I'd grown used to the occasional odd sound, the creak of the old floors, the rattle of the vending machines. But that night, everything felt amplified. Time slowed, or maybe it was just me noticing every detail for the first time. Around midnight, I settled into the security office, sipping lukewarm coffee, trying to shake off the creeping unease. That's when I noticed it on the monitors. Footprints in the snow outside the back entrance. At first, I thought it was a joke, maybe one of the other guards messing with me. The tracks were too deliberate, spaced evenly, like someone was stalking the edge of the building. I grabbed my coat and flashlight, convinced I'd find a coworker hiding behind a dumpster or crouched in the shadow of the loading dock. But when I reached the door, it was locked from the inside. My stomach sank and I froze, staring at the tracks through the icy glass. They stopped abruptly in the middle of the parking lot, like whoever or whatever had been walking had vanished into thin air. A cold wind swept past me then, carrying a faint whisper that sounded unmistakably like my name. I turned, heart hammering, but no one was there. The sound seemed to echo from the dark corners of the lot, soft at first, then growing insistent, like a voice brushing against the edges of my mind. I tried to rationalize it. Wind hitting the old metal siding, my imagination running wild, but it felt personal, targeted. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a dread settled deep in my chest. I went back to the security monitors, trying to convince myself that what I was seeing wasn't real, but every camera angle showed the same thing. Empty snow, silent and still, yet the footprints remained as if frozen in time. For the next few hours, the sense of being watched never left me. I could feel eyes on me, though I never saw them. Every creak in the floor made my pulse spike. Every shadow flickering in the corner of the security office felt alive. I kept the flashlight trained on the back lot, scanning the darkened edges, but the beam only revealed stillness. The wind howled outside, rattling the dumpsters and sending loose plastic bags tumbling across the asphalt. I kept hearing that faint whisper, sometimes barely audible, sometimes rising in urgency, always just out of reach. I tried moving around the store, patrolling like I normally would, but every aisle seemed to stretch unnaturally. The shelves, usually so ordinary, now felt like walls closing in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was slipping just beyond the edge of my vision. I would catch a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting behind a shelf or across the lot, but when I turned, there was nothing. My own reflection in the glass doors startled me at first. I thought it was someone else crouching behind me. Every step I took sounded too loud, echoing in the empty store like it belonged to someone much larger than me. At one point, I huddled behind the security desk, wrapping my arms around myself, listening. The faint scuff of snow on concrete reached my ears again. I peered out the window and saw the tracks had changed. They were closer now, circling the building. I hadn't moved, hadn't opened the door, yet somehow they had shifted. I could feel a presence circling me, slow and deliberate, patient and waiting. It wasn't just an intruder, it was something that understood I was alone, understood that I couldn't call anyone, couldn't leave. Hours crawled by. The fluorescent lights flickered until one finally gave out with a sharp pop, plunging the office into half-darkness. I tried the radios, the phones, even banging on the metal door, but no response came. The whisper returned, sharper this time, as if the voice had stepped closer, brushing against the edge of my consciousness. "Faraz," it said, clear and deliberate. My name, carried on the winter wind, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I pressed myself closer to the desk, wishing the sunrise would hurry along, wishing the world would return to the ordinary hum of flickering lights and cold linoleum floors. The hours blurred. Every noise was magnified. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant thump of a dumpster lid, the rattle of a sign swaying outside. Shadows grew longer, bolder, as though they were daring me to leave my post. I didn't dare. I couldn't. I could feel a presence brushing just out of sight, moving around the building with a patience that terrified me. I could imagine it there, leaning around the corner of the office, peering through the frosted windows, studying me as I clutched my coffee mug like a lifeline. Finally, dawn broke. The first weak light of morning spilled over the lot, melting the shadows into ordinary shapes. The snow outside had drifted into silence, and the footprints had vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. The building felt heavier than before, weighed down by the memory of the night. I left the office shaking, needing fresh air, sunlight, anything to reassure me that I hadn't imagined it all. But even outside, the memory lingered. The whisper in the wind, the slow circling of those unseen steps, the feeling of being hunted in a place that should have been safe. Weeks later, I still can't walk past that store at night without a cold knot in my stomach. I've gone back to other shifts, to ordinary nights, but I keep checking the lot, counting shadows, listening for whispers. I can't explain what I saw or what I felt, and maybe that's the worst part. The snow, the footprints, the wind carrying my name, they don't make sense, and yet they were real. I don't know who or what was out there that night, and I'm not sure I want to. I only know the sense of being watched, of being followed, is still there, hiding in the corners of quiet winter nights, waiting for someone to be alone again. I'd worked security in that little 3-story office building for nearly 5 years, long enough to know every sound the place made. The creak in the lobby doors when the wind pushed them, the way the vents rattled in the second-floor hallway, even the faint hum of the elevator when it moved between floors. On Christmas night, the place was always dead quiet. Most tenants were home with their families, and the few who weren't had left early. I remember thinking that shift would be easy, slow, quiet, maybe even peaceful in a lonely sort of way. I brought a thermos of coffee, a book I planned to pretend I'd read, and settled in. By 2 a.m., the building felt like it was holding its breath. The heating system shut off every so often, leaving the hallways silent enough that my footsteps sounded louder than they should have. I was doing a slow walkthrough of the lobby when the elevator dinged. Not the soft echo from inside the shaft I sometimes heard. This was the real chime, sharp, loud, like it was announcing someone arriving. I turned just as the doors slid open. A man stepped out, tall, coat buttoned all the way to his throat, head lowered so his face disappeared under the brim of a dark hat. I'd never seen him before, and I knew all the tenants by sight. Even if he were a visitor, he'd need a badge to access the upper floors. But he wasn't holding anything. He just stood there, unmoving, staring at me. I tried my usual greeting, even managed to make my voice sound level. "Evening, sir. You need help finding someone." He didn't respond. Didn't nod, didn't shrug, didn't even look like he breathed. He just stared. The lights above the elevator flickered once, long enough that my eyes adjusted to the dimness. When they came back on, the man was closer, only a few feet from me, though I hadn't heard a single footstep. I flinched, stumbling back into the lobby desk. I blinked, and for a split second, he wasn't there at all. Just an empty lobby, the elevator still open behind it. But then he was standing near the hallway entrance, too far to have moved there unless he'd sprinted. Yet I didn't hear anything. My throat dried out, and a cold feeling crawled up my spine. Something was wrong with the way he moved. Or didn't move. I reached for my radio, thumb hovering over the button, even though I knew no one else was on shift. "Sir," I said again, slower this time, "I'm going to have to ask who you're here to see." He finally moved. Not his head, not his arms, but his entire body shifting in one slow, unnatural motion, turning just enough to angle himself toward the hallway. Then he walked. But his footsteps were wrong. They didn't land the way a person should. They were too soft, too even, like he wasn't touching the floor completely. I followed him because I had to, because not following felt worse. My pulse hammered in my ears. I kept glancing at the security cameras through my phone feed, switching between hallways. Every feed showed what I should have expected on a holiday night. Nothing. Just empty corridors, empty stairwells, empty elevator. Even though I was staring directly at the back of a man who wasn't supposed to be there. I called out again. "Sir, hold up. You can't just." He turned a corner. When I followed, he wasn't there. The hallway stretched straight ahead, no doors open, no room he could have ducked into. The air felt colder, like a draft had passed through with him. I checked every door on that floor, even the storage closets, but everything was locked. Everything empty. When I got back to the lobby, the elevator dinged again. The doors opened on their own. My breath hitched. He stepped out again. Same posture. Same dark coat. Same lowered head. He was repeating it. Like I had looped time somehow, falling into the same moment again. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. "What do you want?" I whispered. The lights flickered again, and for a second the whole lobby went black. When they came back on, he stood inches from me. Close enough that if he reached out, he'd touch me. But he didn't. He just leaned slightly forward like he was listening. I could smell something faint, like cold air mixed with old concrete. I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them, he was gone. I don't remember deciding to chase him, but I ran. I sprinted down hallways I knew by heart, turning corners blindly, checking every room, every shadow, calling out words that felt useless the second they left my mouth. The whole building felt wrong, like the hallways stretched longer, like the turns didn't match where they should have been. I swear I ran in a full circle twice, even though the lobby should have been straight ahead. Every time I glanced behind me, I thought I saw the tail of that dark coat disappearing around a corner. By 4 a.m., my nerves were shot. I stopped in the second-floor break room, breathing hard, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. The building hummed faintly, the kind of low vibration you feel in your bones more than you hear. The fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead, flickering in uneven pulses. And underneath that buzzing, I heard footsteps. Slow, steady, wrong. They didn't sound like mine. They didn't sound like anyone's. They echoed down the hallway toward me. I pressed myself against the wall, listening, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped just outside the break room door. I didn't move. I didn't call out. Something in me knew not to. After what felt like minutes, the footsteps moved again, this time heading away. I let out a shaky breath and checked the hallway. It was empty. The camera feeds still showed nothing. Every hallway looked still, undisturbed. Only the lobby lights flickered now, as if something was moving just beneath their reach. By the time dawn hit, the building seemed to exhale. The lights steadied. The air warmed. Whatever had been walking those halls, whatever had stepped out of that elevator was gone. The lobby looked ordinary again, painfully normal. Even the elevator doors stood open like they had been waiting for me to check inside. I did. Slowly. There was nothing there. For a few seconds, I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, that the long shift and holiday loneliness had gotten into my head. But when I stepped back, I noticed something on the floor. Something small, something dark. A faint wet footprint. One print. Not mine. Leading toward the lobby door and fading after that. I never told anyone. I didn't think anyone would believe me, and honestly, I didn't want to speak it out loud. It felt like naming it might bring it back. But weeks later, every time I work a late shift in that building, I feel it again. That pressure on the air, that sense of someone standing just behind me when the hallways go quiet. And when the elevator dings on its own, even if no one steps out, I don't go near it. I can't. Because some part of me knows that if I look inside at the wrong moment, I might see that dark coat again, and this time he won't wait for the lights to flicker before he steps closer. I'd been working the night shift at that old industrial building for years, but that Christmas night was unlike any other. The place was silent in a way that made the usual hum of machines and ventilation seem almost loud. I settled into the security office as usual, the small room cluttered with monitors, files, and the ancient radio that had been here longer than I had. Normally, it just hissed with static, picking up faint signals from far-off stations or maybe just the building's wiring. But that night, it felt different, as if it were listening to something I couldn't see. At first, it was just faint whispers mixed with the static. I didn't pay much attention, assuming someone was playing a prank, or maybe my nerves were getting the better of me. But the voices grew clearer over the first hour, threading their way through the crackle. "Get out! Don't look! He's here!" The words weren't loud, just urgent, insistent, like they were pressed into my skull rather than spoken aloud. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was the wind, the building creaking, maybe even the static itself forming patterns my mind wanted to understand. By 1 a.m., the radio was no longer just whispering. The static swelled into a low hum that rattled my teeth, filling the office with vibrations I could feel in my chest. Shadows in the corners deepened, stretching unnaturally along the walls and ceiling. The monitors flickered, and every few seconds I caught brief flashes of movement, shapes that appeared and vanished the moment I looked directly. I tried to convince myself it was a reflection, a glitch, a trick of my eyes in the dim light. But the feeling of being watched was undeniable, crawling over my skin like cold fingers. Around 2 a.m., the air in the office seemed to thicken. I could hear the faintest steps outside the door, pacing slowly but with purpose. The rhythm didn't match any normal pattern. It was uneven, almost mocking. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just pressed my back against the chair, listening, willing my mind to stay rational, telling myself the building's old floors made noises in patterns that could fool anyone. The whispers from the radio grew insistent, almost pleading. "Don't look, he's here," they said, each word stretched out, dragged like they had weight. My stomach twisted, and I felt the hair rise on my arms and neck. The cold in the room seemed to settle into my bones, and I realized I hadn't felt this alone anywhere ever. The sense of presence was overwhelming, pressing against the walls, leaning around the edges of the office, brushing just beyond my vision. I tried to focus on the monitors, flipping through cameras, checking hallways, stairwells, the loading dock. Every feed was empty, normal, silent. But the feeling didn't leave me. I could hear the movement outside the office door. Soft, deliberate, pacing, circling. It never stopped. And the whispers never stopped. They came from the radio, the walls, the shadows, everywhere at once, yet impossible to locate. I thought about opening the door once. Just a crack, enough to see what was there. My hand hovered over the knob, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. But I didn't. The instinct to survive, to stay in that room and remain hidden, held me back. Something in me knew that opening the door would be a mistake, that some part of this presence was tethered to the outside of that threshold. By 4 a.m., the whispers began to merge with the faint hum of the radio into a single, almost intelligible phrase. "He's waiting. He's always here." My mind tried to rationalize it: electrical interference, stress, fatigue. But even as I told myself that, I could feel it. The office was alive in a way it shouldn't be. The monitors flickered again, showing nothing, yet the shadows danced as if mocking me, curling toward me from the corners of the room. The steps outside the door grew more distinct, slower now, deliberate. Each one landed with intent, measured, like the intruder was testing my patience, toying with me. I dared not move. I didn't breathe too deeply. I just waited, heart hammering, listening as the unseen presence moved with an almost human curiosity. Suddenly, the radio went dead. The hiss and the hum and the whispers ceased. The silence that followed was heavier than the static ever was. I could feel it pressing down, pressing into me, the walls themselves seeming to lean in. The footsteps stopped too, but the room didn't feel empty. The shadows hung longer than they should have, almost tangible, and I could feel something in the space between them, watching, waiting. I stayed there until the sun began to peek over the horizon, the dim morning light spilling into the office. The sense of immediacy lifted, the oppressive pressure eased, but the memory of the night lingered, etched into the walls and into my mind. The radio remained dead, and the monitors returned to their ordinary flicker, but I could still feel the weight of whatever had been there. Weeks later, the memory hasn't faded. I can still hear the whispers when the office is quiet, faint and impossible to locate. The footsteps still echo in my ears, and the shadows seem to linger longer than they should when I pass through the hallways. I don't know who or what was there that night, and I have no way of proving it. But I know it was real. I know the office itself held something that could watch, could move, could speak through static. And I know that if I ever go back to that security office on a quiet night, some part of me will expect the whispers to return, and I will feel that presence just beyond my vision, waiting for me to make the mistake of looking.